So the NPT, or the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, is the world's pillar of the non-proliferation effort that the treaty signed, negotiated in 1968 and signed and ratified over the following 2 years. At the moment it has 189 member countries, which is only 4 short of the total United Nations membership total. There are only 4 countries that aren't members right now: Israel, Pakistan, India, and North Korea. The NPT was established basically to accomplish 3 things simultaneously. The first one was promote disarmament among the existing nuclear powers of the time. Secondly, discourage and slow the rate of nuclear proliferation to countries that didn't yet have nuclear weapons. And third, promote the peaceful use of nuclear technology, primarily for electricity generation. And it does the 3 of these in coordinated fashion. It's been very successful in 2 of the 3, less successful in 1 of the 3. And of course, the one it's not been very successful on so far is disarmament. While the countries that had nuclear weapons in 1968 have, generally speaking, fewer than they did at the time, they're still, all of them, quite a long way away from full disarmament, and that is the ultimate goal of that particular pillar of the NPT.
It's a treaty, but it's a political bargain. And it's a political bargain between the nuclear haves and have-nots. The nuclear haves, the nuclear weapon states, agree not to support or to promote the proliferation of weapons and weapons technology, not to threaten to use it. And then the non-nuclear weapon states agree not to try to obtain nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons technologies.
The NPT does 2 things. It establishes a set of procedures and mechanisms to enable the world to know that nuclear weapons technology is not getting out of hand, that it's not spreading willy-nilly, that we won't be surprised by countries all of a sudden developing nuclear weapons when we didn't expect that they even had programs in place. So it gives just an early warning, it provides ways of slowing and discouraging countries from acquiring, and it gives us a way of knowing the state of the world in terms of who's doing what and why. It also does a second thing, which is it promotes the norm of non-proliferation. Nuclear weapons are something that the world as a whole increasingly abhors. There's a strong, growing public aversion to the idea that international security should rely anywhere on the possession of nuclear weapons. And of course, there's a global abhorrence of the idea of nuclear war. Contrary to popular belief, this is not yet at the level of a taboo. A taboo is such a strict social prohibition that the actual thought of something generates a feeling of disgust. That's not yet true with nuclear weapons, because many countries, in fact, have strategic policies that at least officially require the use of nuclear weapons under certain circumstances. But there is a growing norm against the reliance on nuclear weapons, and the NPT is one of the main vehicles through which that norm is promoted.
The IAEA has become, in some senses, the watchdog of the NPT, as it is the watchdog of other nuclear agreements, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty or the Partial Test Ban Treaty and others. So the IAEA is responsible for investigating, for monitoring, for protecting safeguards, making sure that nuclear power plants are safe, for security, for making sure that post 9/11 terrorist threats are managed, and also for the promotion of the third part of the bargain, the promotion of technologies and new capabilities for the peaceful use of nuclear energy for the non-nuclear weapon states.
In order to benefit from the pro-civilian nuclear power generation pillar of the NPT, signatories must also accept safeguards and inspections. And it's the IAEA that performs those vital functions. They're the folks, generally speaking, who are on the front lines keeping track of who's doing what nuclear materials are where, what kinds of programs different countries have, and how safe nuclear materials are being safeguarded.
It has failed if we say India, Pakistan, North Korea, allegations now, investigations about Iran, Syria, Iraq. We could say that the NPT treaty didn't deal with those.
Now, whether or not the NPT unraveled because of the Indian test is an arguable point, because the countries who became the real proliferators, or the difficult ones, or the problematic ones, were Iraq, which had signed the NPT and then violated its obligations. But the Iraqi question was settled by the Israelis unilaterally, not by the IAEA. The IAEA kept having inspections and kept calling the evidence inconclusive, which is part of the IAEA. They keep going and they keep coming back with inconclusive reports. And so that became part of the problem. But the Israelis lost patience and they went ahead and bombed the Osiriq reactor. And the same thing the Israelis were to do with the Syrian facility a few years later. And then the case of North Korea, another NPT signatory, in violation of its international obligation, and now the current case of Iran. So we have an interesting situation here where three countries which were signatories to the NPT were in violation, and the Indian government, which had refused to accept the NPT quite openly and vigorously, was seen as the problem. But a few years later, and this is post 1998, now the US government, recently the State Department came out with a statement saying India has an impeccable non-proliferation record, which is a far cry from what was being said by the Canadian government in 1974.
We don't know how well it's worked until it doesn't work, but it may be that the fact that only a few countries have sought nuclear weapons and have been able to obtain it means that the NPT has done a fairly good job.
So you see how things quickly change, and how the whole issue of non-proliferation has to be reframed, and the role of the IAEA has to be reframed in terms of who is the real problem, and what is the nature of the problem, and what is the solution.
At the time the NPT was first negotiated, the expectation was that within 20 or 30 years there would probably be at least 20 or 30 countries who would acquire nuclear weapons in the meantime. That hasn't happened. The actual rate of nuclear proliferation has been very, very slow, pleasantly surprisingly slow. But on top of that, it's almost certainly the case that the NPT has slowed the rate of proliferation, both by discouraging it through promoting the norm of non-proliferation, and by making it more difficult for countries who want nuclear weapons to get them. Because the NPT, through the mechanism of the IAEA and the various safeguards and nuclear suppliers group, has made it harder for the countries who might want to develop nuclear weapons to acquire the expertise, the machines and materials they would need, and in particular the fissile materials that are necessary for a nuclear explosion.